Welcome back everyone. Time to talk about another device that I'm pretty sure you guys already knew what was expecting. The Galaxy S10e is probably one of my favorite devices, and I talk about this phone a lot, which is so funny because it's like such a random device, but for a lot of people out there, they gush over this device. I've been using that word gush over a lot. Anytime I make a video about the Galaxy S10e, it fairly does well, which makes me think that there's still a lot of hype on this device, and rightfully so. Samsung did a really good job on this. They eventually phased it out when they released the S10 Lite, which was very random, but then they did the S20 FE, so I think the FE lineup is pretty much the successor to the S10e lineup, so I guess we'll kind of see what happens there. Hopefully they keep that FE lineup, but a lot of people like this phone because it came in that smaller form factor. The FE, the S20 FE, is kind of bigger, and I'm not really, I like the phone, but it seems like they're trying to make like a bigger lineup. I wish they kind of made like the S10e of the S20. I think that would have been really, really cool. Now with the S10e, it came out last year, so over a year ago, and you can actually pick these things up on Amazon for like less than $500 in a lot of places, and I think they're even cheaper than that on eBay. So if you want them on Amazon, I'll link it down in the description below. You can get them from there and help support the channel at the same time. And one of the biggest assets of the Samsung Galaxy S10e was probably the screen. The fact that it looked kind of like the S10 and it had very little bezel around the whole entire display, I think that was one of its biggest assets for sure, because people would look at this phone and be like, well, it doesn't look like a cheap phone. It doesn't feel like a cheap phone, because it wasn't. They really didn't. The only thing they really, kind of brought down was kind of the battery life, but even the battery life wasn't that bad on this device, surprisingly. Now you have that 5.8-inch dynamic AMOLED display, and it was 1080p, and I felt like it was a pretty good panel. It wasn't horrible. It was a flat display, kind of, it didn't really curve on the sides too much, which I'm totally okay with. I don't really mind. And you had that whole punch display. You had a really good panel, and I think maybe the only downside of it, of picking it up in late 2020, would probably be the fact that we have like 90 hertz displays and 120 hertz. But if you're not a fan of that, if you don't really care about it, then I think this display is still pretty good for the most part. Like, there's really not that much you can go above this. If you wanted 1440p with 120 hertz, you can always pick up the Galaxy S20, but I feel like the S10e, for the display that it had at that time for that price tag, was actually pretty good, and I feel like it's one of its biggest assets for sure. Now on the bottom you have USB Type-C as well as a headphone jack, which is really interesting. You don't really see those nowadays, but you had that capability on this device, which is really cool. And on the back you had a glass back, which is cool. It supports wireless charging and reverse wireless charging, which is still something we don't really see on a lot of devices. It was rumored that the iPhone 12s are going to bring it. They ended up not bringing it, but this phone has it, which is awesome. And you have a dual camera setup on top. Now this camera setup, I felt like at that time was like pretty average. I didn't think it was going to be like as good as the S10, but for a majority of things that I did, and for all of the tests that I've done throughout the life cycle of this device, I saw that this camera is actually really, really decent. It has a 12 megapixel wide angle lens and then a 16 megapixel ultra wide sensor. And I think the biggest thing that made me think that this phone wasn't going to be as good as the S10 was mostly because of the lack of telephoto lens. But first of all, I never really use the telephoto lens that much, it doesn't matter. But also, visually, when you look at a phone that has 3 cameras over 2 cameras, you just assume that it's just not as good. Oh, the other one is better because of the extra sensor. But for 99% of the things you're going to do, you're just going to go, take the photo, maybe zoom in, and then just click it. Like, you're not really overthinking it. And I feel like these manufacturers spend a lot of time talking about the cameras when they're doing their keynotes and stuff. For like almost everyone I know, they're usually just either making Snapchat videos or like TikToks or sending a message to somebody. Like, they don't really like need to think about the photo and make it the best quality. They just want to go, tap it, and move on. And this camera, I think, does it very well. The UI is pretty good. You have a lot of features built into the camera as well. You have portrait mode on this thing. You have a lot of different features. And with One UI 2.5, it brought even more features into this camera, which is really awesome. And like I said before, anytime we get new features in the software, that is always one of my favorite things to look about and just gush over. So for sure, this camera on this phone is very good in my opinion. And like I said, I've done all those comparisons before, those camera comparisons, and I saw that the S10e camera, in my opinion, was probably better than a lot of those other cameras. On the front, you have a 10 megapixel wide angle lens. You can do 4K at 60 on this front facing camera as well, which is awesome. So for sure, when it comes down to this camera, I love it. I think it's great. And for a phone that's, over a year old, I think it holds up extremely well, especially for a budget device of last year. This phone wasn't necessarily the flagship, and the fact that it has this good of a camera gets a thumbs up for me in my books. Now, zooming out of the camera, I gotta come up with something else because that's so corny. You can see that we do have IP68 dust and water resistance on this phone as well, which is really cool. That's something that a lot of phones are pretty much coming out with, but the fact that this one has it is awesome. And you have expandable storage on this device as well. When you look all across the board of just Samsung devices, pretty much all of them have expandable storage, so it may just be like a given. But when you look at the competition, you look at, something like the Note 20, which is not really a competition to this device, but the Pixel 5, the OnePlus 8 and 8T, those phones don't have expandable storage. Even like the iPhones, they don't have expandable storage. So it kind of sucks that those phones are like not bringing that capability, and the S20 and S10e and all those ones, those are the only ones that have it. But I still think for a majority of things you're going to do, it's perfectly fine. And I feel like the Galaxy S10e, for having that expandable storage, it makes it that much better of a device in my opinion. So in terms of the body, that pretty much covers it up. Now software wise, this thing is one of those devices that supports that new extra year of software updates, which is awesome. So you can get this phone now and you'll pretty much be getting Android 11 very soon, but you'll also be getting Android 12 whenever that comes out. So this thing, still has a lot of time to go. It's not like it's going to be outdated tomorrow, and it's not like it's going to be outdated next year either. It's going to be lasting for a little bit of time, which is amazing. I love seeing that type of capability, and software is one of my favorite things to talk about a phone, and the fact that this thing is still getting software updates is going to be awesome. So pretty much software-wise, that pretty much covers it. There's not really that much to hate on. Now performance-wise, this thing had the Qualcomm Snapdragon 855 chipset. It didn't have like a 765G of that year. It had the 855, which is awesome. Has an octa-core CPU, has an Adreno 640 GPU, and it has 6 gigs of RAM on the base model and then 8 gigs of RAM on that top tier model. So like I said before, a huge asset of this device. The performance of this thing, I think, was top tier. I think it had really good performance overall. Really everything you're going to do on this device, it's going to be able to handle it. If you're playing, super intensive games, if you're multitasking between stuff, realistically it's going to be okay. Now if you're trying to do a bunch of different things, trying to edit videos and play a huge game and all this stuff, it's going to take a toll not only on performance but on battery life. But if that's you, you could probably get by with this thing. On my usage day to day, I'm not really doing anything crazy. I'm just going on Instagram, TikTok, and just kind of scrolling through. I'm not really doing anything crazy, and I don't really even play those many games. All I play is Temple Run, and even that I don't play that often. So I think for my usage is perfectly fine. But if you're somebody who is constantly trying to edit videos and photos on your phone and typing papers and doing all sorts of crazy stuff, then this phone will probably be able to handle it to an extent. It's not going to be an extremely amazing experience. Something like a OnePlus 7 Pro or something like a OnePlus 8, I think maybe the better way to go, or OnePlus 7T Pro is what I meant to say. But this thing, I think for a majority of things you're going to do with it, is going to be perfectly fine, and I think it's going to be perfectly fine and then some. It's not like you're going to get this phone and feel like it's completely outdated or something. That's not going to be the case at all. And for sure, I think the performance of this phone is definitely an asset. And like I said, if you get the base model, you have 6 gigs of RAM. If you get that top tier model, it's 8 gigs of RAM. And even with the S20, we still have 8 gigs of RAM inside of it. So I think on the RAM side, you're probably going to be okay. But performance wise, it definitely gets a thumbs up for me in my books for sure. So in terms of performance, that pretty much covers it up. Now ending it off with the battery life, this thing had a 3100 milliamp hour battery inside of it. Like I said, it has wireless charging and reverse wireless charging. And what's really weird is that when I got this phone, I was expecting this battery life to not be that great, but it actually ended up being way better than I thought. But on top of that, and this is the weird thing, the Samsung Galaxy S10e had a better battery life than a lot of other devices that I was comparing it to this year. I compared it to the SE2, I compared it to some other phones too, I don't remember, and this phone was pretty much beating those devices. And it was crazy because it was time and time again, this phone was able to beat, I think the Pixel 4a as well, that was the one I tested it against, and the S10e was able to beat that battery life, which is amazing. And the fact that this phone doesn't even have the full 100 milliamp hour battery inside of it, or the 100% milliamp hours, it's degraded a little bit, and the fact that it was still able to beat those phones is really impressive to me. And I feel like the battery life on this device is probably an asset. But it's funny though, because with 3100 milliamp hours, you wouldn't assume it'd be that great, but it kind of is, and it was beating a lot of phones that had bigger batteries in size. So Samsung really optimized its chipset or whatever inside of this phone to make it that much better. But in terms of battery life, that pretty much covers it up. Now to kind of sum up this video and to answer the question, should you pick up the Samsung Galaxy S10e in the later part of 2020? What I will tell you is, first of all, the pros and cons, I always do it. The pros of this device it feels really good in the hand. It still feels like a super premium device. It doesn't feel like a cheap phone. You can pick it up for relatively cheap from what it was last year. The screen of this thing is very good. You have a fingerprint sensor on the side of this phone. You have expandable storage, which is amazing. The performance of this phone is top tier. I feel like it's extremely good. The battery life of this phone is really good. The camera on this thing is amazing. And for the price that you're paying for, I think it's a really, really good pickup. I think some of the cons maybe, like the fact that it doesn't have like a 12 gig of RAM option that we have nowadays, the lack of 90 hertz or 120 hertz that we're kind of seeing this day and age, the lack of a telephoto lens on the camera. That may be a big deal to a lot of people. Maybe performance if you're doing a lot of crazy stuff, like doing a ton of video editing, photo editing, all that stuff, then maybe this won't be good. But I think it's going to be probably good enough for a lot of people. That shouldn't even be a problem. And that's really pretty much all the problems that I can think of. And maybe like the price tag now, like it's still around like that 300, 400-ish kind of dollar price tag. And maybe you can pick up a better phone for like a little bit more in the new market even. But I think for a lot of people out there, getting the Samsung Galaxy S10e would be a really good thing to do. Again, it's not a perfect phone. It's not going to, take you to the moon or anything. But like I said, I think for a majority of people watching this video, if you're trying to get a specific phone for the cheapest price, I think the Galaxy S10e is still a super relevant device. And the fact that it's still getting software updates and it's getting an extra year of software updates on top of that is a humongous asset for this device. So I'd probably tell you getting a Galaxy S10e is probably the better way to go if you're trying to get a used phone of last year for a cheap price. So that really pretty much covers it up for the most part. If you guys have any other questions or anything, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. Every single subscriber that we get really does count, so it means so much if you guys can hit that. Also check out the other links down in the description as well. My Twitter, my Instagram, my other channels. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.